so I'll let Carter come and tell us what we're going to do today.
Today you're going to be hearing back from the department on the crowd management and control policy, as well as a little information on the mental health policy that we received between meetings. Some information about the body-worn camera policy and grant work that we've done on that. Provide opportunity for questions on the chief's presentation and a presentation on the 21st Century Policing Task Force report that Assistant Chief Durr will provide.
Okay, thank you, Carter. Next is public comments, and at this time I'll turn the meeting over to our Vice Chair, Bill Whalen, and allow him to call up.
And if there's anybody else who wants.
Oh, right, thank you. Yes, please, if there's anyone else in the audience who would like to speak, come and fill out one of these blue sheets of paper. They're on the table over there at the opposite end, and we'd be happy to accommodate you. So I'll let Bill handle this now.
So I have two people that have signed up to speak, Jessica C. Screen and Jack Brady. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. When 20 seconds, know when there's 20 seconds left.
Hi, I'm Jessica C. Screen. I have a comment about the crowd management and control policy. This is about the civil disobedience aspect. I'm like Commissioner Gehring. I have my share of experience with civil disobedience in other cities and other times. I think that what you have here doesn't really capture something that some people call direct action, but it would be difficult for me to suggest changes to incorporate that. But there is one thing that I do, one word thing that I want to nitpick about and have a suggestion for changing. And that's the last word in the definition of civil disobedience, punished. It's done with the expectation of being punished. I think that you shouldn't use the word punished there, and I think consequences would be better. Expecting or being willing to accept consequences would be better. And that's because I don't think it's the police role to be involved in punishment. I think that's, judge or jury. It's after due process. And I realize this doesn't say who's going to exert punishment, but I think I would not like to see something from our police commission that seemed to give any kind of approval to police to be punishing. It gives me a feeling of what I'm there, and I'm telling you, I'm expecting to be like whacked by a baton, or in Portland stepped on by a horse, or maybe more likely here in Eugene would be unnecessarily tased or pepper sprayed, or handcuffs tightened beyond the point that it's appropriate to be tightened, or not allowed to go to the bathroom for too many hours, or, those kind of things of punishment. Actually getting a ticket or an arrest in that kind of situation is not what we would consider punishment. That's often what you want, and in fact, often you're disappointed if the police don't oblige. So the word punishment, I think, is just wrong there, and better would be willingness to accept consequences, or just changing it to consequences. Thank you.
And next we have Jack Brady.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jack Brady. I'm the Legal Redress Chair for the NAACP branch for Eugene Springfield. A couple things I want to talk about. We recently had two situations. One where a call came in the department, and after it was translated through dispatch, they responded for fear someone was going to be shot. They had reported someone was shooting at or out of a window. And as a result of responding in what seemed to them the appropriate manner, someone was shot. But we all know it was Brian Babb. It would have been better all around if the situation had been handled differently. A few weeks after that, in the case of Aisha Brown, the police received a report that eventually, by way of dispatch, was that a woman was being assaulted, and as a result of the police answering the call in all good faith and following doctrine, a woman was assaulted, but it was by the police. This is not to say this person or that person made some terrible error and should be punished for it. What it does point to, in a much broader field, these are just two examples, is there's a problem, not specific by any manner of means to the Eugene Police Department, where things I think are better than in many places. But to solve a problem, you first have to recognize it. And I was a bit perturbed last time I was at this body that I did not hear a lot of recognition that a police officer might do something wrong. It was, in fact, when discussing the question of seizing a cell phone, that there might be evidence on the only person at the table who raised the question, well, people might be worried about that because there might be an officer seizing evidence of police misconduct, was our chief. And I would have been much more pleased if members of the commission had raised that as an obvious element in the situation. All right. There has been, I hope you have all seen this, this is re-engineering training of police use of force from the Police Executive Research Forum. This is 750 chiefs who met in May of this year. If you have not read the report, get it and read it. The bottom line at the beginning, the guy says, one of the chiefs says, is we've all seen the videos. We've all seen them. We can't defend this stuff. We cannot maintain our ability to police if we do not have the support of the community in doing so. Some communities, we've never had that. In some communities, we're losing it. I think there is recognition among police leadership throughout the country that something has to be changed. There's some excellent proposals in here. I know our department is aware of them and is talking about them, and I think this should be encouraged strongly. I have numerous other ideas that could be done on this, and I'll be happy to share them with you at another time. Thank you.
Before you leave, could you give us the name of that report again, please?
Yes, it's, here, I'll pass it around.
We can get
I'll
it.
send
Not
it.
perfect.
We got
My
it.
printer didn't
I'll send
pick
the
up
link.
quite
Okay,
everywhere.
thank you.
I'll send it out.
Okay, great.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. That completes the public comment section of our agenda tonight. And so we'll move into the commissioners' comments and responses. And before I get into that, I'm going to pass around another comment that a person that could not be here today asked that we share with the commissioners. And that his comments will be appended to the minutes and made a part of the record as his request. So for your information, just issues related to the crowd management policy that we've been looking at. And he wanted his opinion known, so thank you. And who would like to start off? Okay, Steve.
I appreciate Jessica's comments, and I'd be frankly open to changing that word management. Thank you for that.
Okay, Marshall?
I'm on board. I would suggest legal consequences. That just seems to be appropriately
Okay. Thank
what they're expecting.
you. Thank you.
Well,
All right. Bill?
I just want to thank all the speakers tonight. I always appreciate when the public comes and makes comments to the commission. I also want to say that last Thursday was a tragedy, but the Eugene Police Department, we got a note home from my daughter's principal that they sent 2 officers over to the school just to check on them. They did a tour, they played with the kids. They said it was really great that they did that, and I really appreciate the chief and Bill Votes was that said that. I think that was great. I don't know if we did that to all the schools or if it was just.
Yes.
I think that was a really great move.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Edward?
Just want to concur with Majestica's suggested change. I have to tell you, thinking back to the 60s, no, we didn't do it with the expectation of being punished. We did it with the expectation of making a point and then getting away scot-free without having broken the law. Just making a point, but it didn't always work that way.
Joe?
Could we make that a motion at this
We'll
point?
have to wait till the item to come up on the agenda, but yes, keep that in mind, please. Anybody else? Anybody else? Joe?
Yeah, just in general, I think Jessica's stuff is, suggestions are good. But reading through this, I get the impression that it jumps too quickly to violence. In other words, to shows of force and the like. It doesn't seem to, there are sections in there talking about de-escalating, or sort of standing aside to let the thing sort of fizzle out. But I don't think that that's emphasized enough, that a lot of these situations don't need to be, that they will go away by themselves in a period of time, and maybe cooler heads prevailing might be the thing to do.
Anyone else? Save mine to last then. Thank everybody for coming tonight. It's kind of rough. And, it's Thursday night football, it's playoffs, we've got all this stuff going on, so everybody's got to try to get in the last little bit of the summer-like weather we've got. I appreciate all of you folks who show up tonight and make the important move to come here to help decide some of these important issues we have tonight. And we do have a good agenda tonight, so we're going to get right into it now. Move out of comments and commissioner comments and move into the reviewing of September minutes, so we can, everyone hopefully has had a chance to look at those. And are there any corrections or changes? Joe?
Yeah, in the section on civil disobedience, there were actually two motions. The first one was voted and passed on. There's no mention of that. And the phrasing has been revised in policy 404. But it would be good, I think, to note that there was a vote that was passed on that first section. Probably goes in after the line. This would be on page 3, where it says civil disobedience, and then probably after Mr. Nowicki. Motion did not receive a second, and then the original motion was voted on and passed.
So I'm a little confused now. So there was a motion made before Mr. Nowicki made an amendment?
Yes.
It's the motion that strikes mere dissent, protest, or disobedience. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the word illegal. Yeah,
Yes,
that one did pass.
right. And that says that Mr. Tyndall moved and Ms. Surratt seconded.
No, that was the second. That was the second motion that was made. It's independent of that first one.
And what was the first motion?
The first one was to change the definition, to remove the second sentence, and to remove the word illegal.
Okay, I'll review the tape, make sure it's right.
Okay.
Well, you can see that those changes have been made in section 404.3, which is 2 pages later here. It's underlined. So,
I think I have that captured as Mr. Tyndall moved and Ms. Surratt seconded that the definition be amended to strike that sentence. And if I'm missing,
yeah, the first paragraph, the paragraph that starts civil disobedience is fine. The second paragraph that starts Mr. Nowicki is fine. What we need is a line in there that says that we voted and passed the original motion.
okay,
Oh, I see what you're saying. That, even though Mr. Nowicki's motion did not receive, the amendment didn't receive a second, there's no
right,
indication in here
Got
that
it.
the original motion was passed.
yeah. got
Okay,
it.
thank you. We
Thank you,
finally
Joe.
figured that one out. Thank you. So we're going to change that. With that amendment, is there any other changes or corrections? Now I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Moved and seconded by Marshall. Moved by Joe, seconded by Marshall. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passed. Moving to crowd management. And so you have in front of you the amended 404 with the changes that were suggested last time. And now would be a good time for someone to move a change to that. Does anybody know
So
what the
moved.
exact section that was? So we can get to it and make sure.
So, I'd like to make a motion to, in that section on civil disobedience, to remove the last 2 words, being punished, and replace them with the words legal consequences.
Motion is made by Joe, have a second by Marshall. And if we could just find the right spot here. I'm not sure exactly where it is in the policy.
404.23.
Yeah. On page 5.
Civil disobedience.
Oh, I'm sorry, there it is, right there, yes, okay. So that's that last section that's already underlined on the first page of your policy. Everybody sees it, understands what we're doing here? All right, any discussion on the motion? No discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All opposed? Unanimous. Okay. Then we have other issues that came up last week that we need to discuss, or has everybody had a time to look at the changes that were made, and are they sufficient, and are we ready to move on? Joe?
As I stated in the opening comments, responding to Jessica's comments, I do think that maybe there could be somewhere in here that, sort of cooler heads prevailed, kind of language might be in there, in other words, a cooling off period, because rather than a confrontation, maybe simply standing aside solves the problem better than shows of force and potential violence.
Anybody else? Any other changes? Okay, I think we're ready to vote on passage of policy as amended last week and amended again this week.
Actually, I do have one.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to section 404.7.4, the approved crowd dispersal method. I know, Sergeant Lowe, we talked about this last time. I went back and read the piece from the President's Task Force, and, they really said that in that show of force, the armored vehicles shouldn't be displayed. They said that was one of the recommendations from Ferguson about bringing those out, even in the show of force. I understand what you were saying last time about if you're actually going to use it, to do tear gas or something like that. I think that's acceptable. I think it's just in that show of force was one of the things they pointed out on that, and it still just sort of concerns me to have it in there. Where it says down in that A, where it
Bottom of
says
page
display
4,
of
sir.
forceful presence, and it says and armored police vehicles. And that was one of the things that it talked about in that task force, about not displaying those initially, not having those out when it's a crowd, before you take action.
I mean, I have a very well-developed opinion about it as a police supervisor. I haven't read the entire section on the demilitarization. I have read pieces of it. And I do know that some of the equipment they listed in there was more traditionally considered offensive military weapons. I know there are agencies that have vehicles that look a lot like Bradley fighting vehicles or Stryker vehicles or up-armored Humvees that look like a military piece of equipment that's got machine guns or some kind of turret on it. The Bearcat, I would submit, is not, I don't know if anybody's seen it or had a chance to get into it. If anybody ever wanted to, I'd be more than happy to get you so you could take a look into it. It's not military in appearance, or it's not as military as maybe some people would think from just hearing the word armored vehicle. It looks a lot like a bank car or a large box delivery truck that we also know happens to have some armor. And if As a police supervisor, safety of the crowd is my concerns, care of the public, but safety of my officers is also probably chief among my concerns. And this is a safe place for officers to be in a position to influence a situation and not be there as targets. I think, you know, I haven't participated in some of the larger riots that we had here in the 90s, but in hearing anecdotes and stories shared from officers who were experiencing those in Eugene, you stand around too long with an angry crowd, and pretty soon it's one bottle or brick or something from 5-10 rows back, because you're attempting targeting sometimes. And this is a safe place for them to be. I hear the concern about the militarization, and I have that same concern. I don't know that the Eugene Police Department could be present with our inventory of vehicles and how we could be absent that vehicle and be as safe as we could be in doing our job. And in that situation, it's unlikely that that turret would be opened and deployed, you know, because I know that sounds militaristic too. But so I respectfully as possible disagree as a show of force that may be too overtly military. It's my personal opinion for discussion purposes.
Okay.
Can I just,
Chief Durr had his hand up, and then Edward, anybody else?
so just
Marshall?
I'm sorry, Bob.
Go right ahead.
Just to add to Matt's description too, is these scenes are dynamic, and we would rather have an asset in place prior to than wishing we had deployed it. And the other purpose of that rescue vehicle, it's a rescue vehicle is our terminology. It's also used to, if there's a situation and we have to go in and rescue somebody, that we can pull that person into a safe environment and conduct life-saving measures on that individual. So it's multi-purpose. So it's not only just for the protection of officers, but it is there in case a situation happens and we need to go rescue somebody. So that's the only additional information to that. And that's,
Okay, I have Edward, Marshall, Claire, and Jim. Edward? No.
Believe me that I look at the national studies on this, and believe me also that in my profession, I had to deal with crowd management issues after, in my youth, being one of those crowds that needed to be managed. So I've seen both sides of this, and some of what works and what doesn't. I want to give our department a little bit of credit for the brains not to roll up any piece of equipment or a bunch of officers with shields or whatnot 6 feet away from some line of protesters and play bump chests. I don't see that as the show of force that this refers to. If you've got resources and you would like people who are perhaps considering doing something foolish like let's make a beer riot, you don't roll the resources up right in front of them and challenge them with it. If you get any sense at all, you'll marshal that a couple of blocks away where they can see it, and those who are cooler heads may stop and think about, this is getting more serious than perhaps we had thought it would. It seems to me there's a whole section here of other stuff the department is going to be doing before these resources are made obvious to the crowd. There are announcements, there's efforts to work with the leaderships of the group, there's efforts to set up lines of communication. That's all good. But I also know that there's always a percentage of people who are not going to follow what their group leader has cut a deal with the police to say, well, if we'll walk on the sidewalk, they'll let us march downtown. There's always going to be some percentage that says, the heck with that, we're going to march in the middle of the street and rap on people's windshields. So there has to be something to safely deal with those people. And sometimes that becomes an issue of the safety of the rest of the crowd now that these individuals have turned the situation violent. So to have a whole realm of things you can apply to the problem that isn't just some officers in blue makes sense. That our department would not put snipers on top of vehicles 10 feet away from unarmed protesters, I think is a no-brainer. And I don't see EPD doing that. So if there's some specific language that needs to be put into this that addresses these concerns about we're just jumping straight to force, I don't see that we are jumping straight to force, but I'm open to the idea that, is there some other step here? I'm a little concerned that if we come up with something like, the tanks don't get within 2 blocks of the crowd except by order of a, you never know, tanks, sorry, don't even mean to use that word, strike that. What is it again?
Rescue vehicle.
The rescue vehicle may need to be deployed much closer than that, in which case we've hamstrung people in a very real-time situation by saying, no, you have to stay 2 blocks away until you can get a sergeant to sign off on it. So those are my thoughts on the matter. Sometimes you need to show people what the consequences are. You can't just tell them with a bullhorn. They need to see something physical. Just saying.
Okay, Marshall, Claire, and Jim next.
I was just responding to Mr. Thiel King's comments he submitted, that I do appreciate him submitting it. I would say that OC spray and other non-lethal chemical agents are not included by international law. They are not allowed to be used in conventional military operations, but they are allowed to be used by the military in appropriate crowd control circumstances. And that's how we train to use them. So I just want to make sure that was clear on the record. It's a tool. We do our best to spell out in policy how it should be used, and I think that's what we should do here. We're not always going to be right because people don't always make good decisions, but we do our best. I think the same is true for the Bearcat. Again, it's a tool. I can tell you from experience it is a lot less threatening than a lot of other armored vehicles. First time I saw an MRAP, I was very impressed. But it's purely defensive as far as I can tell for Bearcat. And like OC, it's a tool. We should have a separate policy for how it's used. I don't want to drag too much into the about specific tools into this policy more than we need to. I think it's well written, and if we want to address changes to policy on use of specific tools, we should do it in some separate policy. Thank you.
Claire?
I actually wanted to raise a different question, so if you want to just
Okay,
put me on a
save
separate
you in the
queue.
next queue. Okay. So Jim?
It took me a little while to find the section in the report in the back where it talked about, that you referred to. It does say to minimize the appearance, not to not use it at all. And I know that as we were told last time about how this is used, that it's kind of like the escalation is going 1 through, or I guess A through E is kind of the escalation as things go at a crowd control. And so after you get past A, then you're really starting to get into contact with the protesters or the crowd. I guess they may not be protesting, but whatever the crowd is. So bringing the vehicle up, or even within visibility, I think would be like a last gasp attempt before you do start moving into the crowd and you have to start playing with the physical contact. So I do kind of like that it's there, and it is as an option. The other person that brought up having it there when it's needed, it's better to have it there and have it there when it's needed than wait and have it sitting here where it's stored and find out you need it, and it's 10, 15 minutes away or even longer. There's a lot of traffic bottled up because of something going on. So, and I do kind of would like to rely on the judgment of our officers. I kind of trust their judgment on the scene to know what's going on and to use something rather than not. I haven't seen a lot of misuse that I could tell of equipment, so I kind of like the way it's worded. And I do agree that, yeah, if you want to have something in a policy about it, a separate policy just revolving around that piece of equipment would probably be a better place for it.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, Joe, you have, you did the second time, Tom. Before we get to the second round, I've got Bill, Matt, and Joe on the second round. Is anybody that has spoken first round? Myself, I just want to point out that on page 10 of your packet today, you have the DAD, they call it, Department Administrative Directive. It was appropriate, I think, for that. But we have armored rescue vehicles, and it talks about it in the second paragraph. But fact that the Bearcat is a valuable tool, but you must remember not to use it, has limitations, and not to use it to incite any crowd into violence. So I think them having an administrative directive to the troops telling them, to use it judiciously makes a big difference, and it's important to keep that in mind in the discussion. So going around the second time, I got Bill, Matt, and Joe.
Ready for me?
Yep.
I guess, and I understand what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, Assistant Chief. Could we maybe use a different terminology that references more of that, with your vehicle? I guess I still have in my mind all the pictures of, I don't know what it was called that Ferguson used, but that big, huge armored vehicle with a sniper sitting on top. And that's what I feel like people that read this policy, that's what they're gonna see in their head, that we've authorized that use of that type, even though we don't have it. I'm looking at it from that standpoint. So,
Okay, Matt and Joe.
Maybe a year ago, it was rainy, I remember the day, so it was probably in the winter or the late fall, but parked out here in our parking lot, there was some kind of police vehicle. I mean, it's a police department's vehicle. It was a SWAT team from Central California, and they'd come up here, and they'd done a search warrant in Portland or something. I don't know how it transpired, but I drove into the headquarters parking lot, and I was shocked. And I'd been in the Army. I've been on the SWAT team. I've seen a lot of these tactical vehicles. Well, this thing was huge. I mean, it was like Bigfoot tires, and it looked like a striker vehicle. I mean, it was just huge. It was just this big mine-resistant looking tank. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I was, so I even people who operate inside of police circles, I mean, I could be shocked by the presence and intensity of a piece of equipment. In our instance here at the Eugene Police Department, we fortunately don't have need for such a large, vehicle. But I would submit, and I know this is subjective, but I think everybody at the table probably trusts me and most everybody in the department, that a sergeant or a watch commander lieutenant with a sergeant and enough well-trained officers to be at the scene with the Bearcat, the crowd is safer and will be dispersed with less injury and to property and to people than they would be if they were without it. And I'm convicted to the core about that. It's a way to close with a group that may be hostile and deliver dispersal agents to get people to go. And instead of doing what Mr. Gearing was saying earlier, where hats and bats, they called it. And we'd get up and we'd close with the group that way. And it's painful and it's not pretty. It doesn't make good footage for the police department. But a bunch of people running away from a gas-filled street, no, it's not a good, optimal situation. But we're not going to be reporting on these severe injuries and things like that. So.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. First time I experienced tear gas was on a really beautiful May day in 1972. The Hillel group at MIT, that's the overweight women and the skinny kids with the beanies, was folk dancing to klezmer music. And this is the beginning of a riot in which 7 people were killed. And the police came in and shot tear gas canisters at the people, hitting them. That was my first experience as I watched that go on. It got a lot worse from there. Now I think that, I've said this many times, that the Eugene Police Department is a much saner, more benign group than a lot of the police departments that I've come across elsewhere in my life. But I still think that maybe the tone of this document, clearly, suggestions for warnings and all the rest of it are present. But I still get a bad feeling from the tone of this document. And having that experience, along with several others, it leads me to be concerned. That's all I can say on this.
Anybody else on this subject matter? If not, we'll move to Claire's concern. Claire?
Thank you. So I was curious on page 2 of the policy 404.5, response to civil disobedience, the last sentence of that first paragraph, passively blocking vehicular travel lanes and public right-of-ways is not considered civil disobedience for the purpose of this policy. I'm curious about why you would call that out, partly because my understanding is that approaching a scenario where civil disobedience is happening wouldn't necessarily dramatically change how you address it. I mean, you're still going to potentially affect arrests and clear the scene. So I didn't understand why you wanted to call that out as not being considered civil disobedience.
Well, because in my simple mind, the dealing with that issue the idea with the response to civil disobedience was, and I looked for some comparables from other large agencies, medium-sized agencies, and I was able to find any that just addressed civil disobedience. So I kind of winged it. Well, I completely winged it. And all I called upon was my experience in dealing with these situations, what worked and what didn't work. And in these events where there's civil disobedience, sometimes we'll respond to a location where it's not public property, it's private property. But before we make a big deal, part of our sort of measured response is evaluating, okay, what is the need to move people from here? Do we have one? Sometimes people will call with real big concerns for police to come and do something when we don't even have a complainant. We have a complainant, meaning somebody who's reporting this to police, but not a victim of trespass or the issue that we should be dealing with criminally. And we don't want to involve ourselves in these, and that's why I called attention that if this is something that's occurring on private property, if we don't have a complainant, like for instance, we had on a Black Friday, it was that day before, like it's a shopping day, and the mall was concerned about a large group of people. I think it was before the Sleeps was a more unified entity. But anyway, that's an example where we would, if there was a large group of people planted in the middle of Valley River Center, we're probably going to get a lot of phone calls from people who are maybe not Valley River management, who are going to want us to come and deal with this. But until we get somebody from Valley River Center to say, hey, will you come get these people out of the way? We're willing to sign for trespass and cooperate in the prosecution. We're going to just not deal with, our first response in these should be, how can we not involve ourselves in this situation if it's not criminal, if it's, or overtly criminal. But I think, and I tried to just war game in my head scenarios where, okay, we may have some public property where this is okay. Free speech plaza, parks. We're not going to just run in and rip everyone out of the parks because they're in there after the park is closed and they're protesting. However, I can see a significant disruption and a genuine governmental interest in not having the Ferry Street Bridge blocked at rush hour. There could be somebody's grandmother having a heart attack on the other side in an apartment who needs the medic that's now stuck in traffic that can't get there. There could be, there's all kinds of governmental interest in having streets open. And if we come to a situation where there's a significant blockage of, say, West 7, I mean, I think about some of the traffic crashes we get right at the base of Ferry Street Bridge. Man, I'm trying to go to the call, and I'm at Chambers and 7th, and it's backed up. Lights are green, but nobody's moving. And I'm sure everybody's sat in traffic and dealt with that. You could probably, right, yeah. And you could probably, I won't belabor it anymore, but you could just, in your head, imagine the different scenarios where if traffic is blocked, that creates a significant life safety concern. And so what I intended to say, and maybe I didn't say it clearly enough, was we can't take a wait and see approach or a let's wait and get enough momentum from the public about doing it. We need to address this, and we need to address it now. We'll do it in an orderly fashion, and we'll do it respecting the rights of people. But we also may not spend 45 minutes trying to establish, do you want to be ceremoniously cited or arrested, and do you want to stay here? We may not go through that exercise of sorting that out. We may just remove people out of the roadway and do it as quickly and as safely as we possibly can. If I didn't say that clearly, but that's my intent. So if you have some other sample language,
I don't necessarily have, thanks for the explanation, I don't necessarily have a recommendation. I understand what you're saying, that you've created a paragraph, partly at our behest, that says civil disobedience will be approached in a particular manner, and a set of protocols. But because I would say blocking travel lanes, blocking Valley River Center, blocking Ferry Street Bridge would very well much be considered civil disobedience, depending on the political statement that's, if there's a political statement involved. However, you say for the purposes of this policy. So I'm all right with your explanation. I think it makes sense to me. I don't know if your sentence captures it enough for the officers who might be reading it. So, there might want to be some, an additional caveat, and therefore, officers would be permitted to take action more quickly, or, I don't want to wordsmith right now, but that might, I think that might be helpful, because clearly if someone's, trying to block the entrance to Valley River Center for a political statement, that's clearly civil disobedience. But I recognize what you're talking about in terms of how do you approach that situation in terms of public safety and right of way. So I'm not going to propose a motion to change that.
Thank you. Okay, we got Edward.
Yeah, I've got a tough time with this sentence as well, Matt, and I hope that you will go back and work on that a little
Yeah,
bit.
of course.
I think raising the issue in your rewording that public safety lanes are really far more of the issue. And especially in Eugene, because there are so few crossings of the river. We have
Yeah.
resources on one side and the other, and hospitals are on one side, and so on and so forth. But it's internally inconsistent that you're giving this definition of civil disobedience. And then over here, there's a really gray, sort of, as I say, open to interpretation by the officer in question. And I think you're going to save yourself, the department, and the taxpayers some money on this if we nail this down now, before somebody armed with this sentence wades into a crowd of people on the Ferry Street Bridge. Bad example, because that is an ambulance alley, but see my point.
Right.
That's all.
Thank you, Edward. And Jim next.
I thought of maybe adding to the last, after the word policy, it says purpose of this policy and will be handled as a public safety issue. Maybe clarify it a little, or something along those lines. I don't know if I want to make an amendment for that, but I think kind of what we're looking at.
Well, it's our policy, so if you want to make a statement, go ahead.
I guess I'll make an amendment to add those last few words to that line, make it more clear.
You capture that word? Did you capture the word?
At the very end, so it would say passively blocking vehicular travel lanes and public rights of way is not considered civil disobedience for the purpose of this policy and will be handled as a public safety concern. I don't know.
Okay, we have a second to that. I'll second it for discussion. Okay, Joe?
I think that if you took is not considered civil disobedience for the purposes of this policy out, and then added, handled as a public safety issue, that I would feel okay with that. So,
I deal with that.
that's a friend's
I see
suggestion.
heads nodding in
I'll
that
go with that.
area, so you want to make your own amendment to that then?
Yes.
Okay,
That'll be
so
fine.
are you capturing this then? Would you say it again one more time? I'll get you clear on that.
I would say take the phrase, is not considered civil disobedience for the purpose of this policy, and add the phrase, will be handled as a public safety concern.
Got it. Okay, so we have the amendment. And, well, you've amended your original motion, so
Friendly.
I still have the second standing, so Claire.
So, I appreciate that idea. Does that mean something to an officer reading that policy?
Yeah, I was just stewing that in my head. I think I erred mostly in pointing out what it isn't, like saying, you don't have this like veil of civil disobedience. I could probably rewrite this sentence. I've learned in doing this job to be as, coming from me, be as little verbose as possible. Right. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that means anything more to an officer, but I'm not sure that not giving credit to it as civil disobedience is going to mean much more either. So I hear exactly what you're saying, and I can't do it right now in my head, but I could sit down and think more, or maybe try to locate some other policy or a topic paper that maybe would say what I'm trying to say in a sentence or two, and maybe not call attention to the fact that it's not this, but that if you see this, handle it like this instead, and not,
So, I mean, I'm not going to support the motion, the amendment. I would prefer to let Sergeant Long come back, not approve the policy tonight, and come back one more time and see what he comes up with.
Well, I have a question. It is a violation of ORS. I'm not familiar with ORS on this, I guess, to block a travel lane.
it is, it's a crime,
Right
it's
away.
disorderly
Okay.
conduct in the second degree.
So if we refer to it in the crime vernacular, then it would be maybe more clear to the officer in violation of law.
Right.
That's right. Okay, so I've got a motion on the floor that we have to deal with. So Edward, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just try to be quick. Whatever we come up with, either by a motion or by you rewording this, somewhere in there block emergency vehicle access, I think is important for the public looking at this policy, to understand why there would be any exception to a response to civils. That's a tough one to argue with.
Thank you. Thank you. So everybody's heard the motion and understands it. If we want to approve that, or we'll vote for it. If we don't, we'll let Matt, the alternative will be Matt, will come back with a.
I'm willing to let it, if Joe, if you're willing to, I'm willing to let it drop and let Matt come back with something.
I think that's a
I'm
better
willing to
solution.
withdraw the
Okay.
amendment and let Matt come back with
I
something.
withdraw my second. The motion is withdrawn. We don't have to vote on anything. That's fine. Matt, we'll see you next month.
Okay.
Guarantee to have you back here.
Yep. Oh, I have good news to report. Thank you, Ms. Carter. The mental health crisis response policy. Lieutenant Mason came up and gave you guys a real good brief on the policy. She listened to your request about sending it to several mental health practitioners, and I spoke to her directly. And I know it went to Doc Leeds, the gentleman you met, but it went to several others whom I don't know, I can't tell you the names of, but she got no feedback other than, good job, we like the way this looks. There was nothing in the way of, you need to change this, or this doesn't jive. So it sounds like as of about a week ago, 6 days ago, she had gotten no criticisms back. Okay, yeah, you are.
Thank you. Okay, we're moving on the agenda to the body worn camera policy.
Could I make just a couple comments about the crowd management policy? I think, well, I agree with what Joe said earlier. This doesn't have the tone that it will when I'm done with it anyway, if you guys don't make the changes. I think this needs to read in such a way that it's pretty clear to our officers that for civil disobedience and demonstrations, the approach has to be based on a philosophy that the better and earlier our engagement is, the more likely that it'll end up safely. And actually, as a business approach, we're far more effective that way. And so it should read and feel that way. The language you're seeing here probably comes from the 1970s for the most part, and it's been adjusted here and there through the decades. And then another thing that I'll probably end up doing, if you don't, is reorder 404.3, the definition, so that it starts with the least criminal, like civil disobedience perhaps, and goes to demonstration, and then ends with civil disturbance, so that as you read through it, you build your way through the most peaceful things, and so it makes sense that the most aggressive force is at the end. Something to consider.
Thank you.
Okay, Chief, there.
Do I need to sit at the end, or is?
You can say wherever you are, that's fine.
So coming back with the body worn video, and I want to thank Matt for helping out in this. It's one of the things that we realized we initially were going to try to combine this policy with our in-car video, but with the grant award and other discussions, we realized, and because the particular situations with body worn video are different, even though there's similarities, we realized we needed to bifurcate that and not have two policies in there. Sergeant Lewis,
Right here, sir.
do you know where this policy, is it still in the queue of things right now?
The body worn.
Body worn video, yes.
Yes, the union, we just got it back from the city attorney's office, and the union is still kind of stewing with it, but.
And one of the things when we came in front and talked about body worn video is we really want the police commission's input, and we really need that to work with the community, because as we talk about 21st century policing later on, you'll see there's a lot of pieces about engaging the community. But one of the things in going through the state statutes and developing this policy, we came to realize that the state, if you have body worn video, you have to have a policy in place. So it turned up the fire on us doing this. So I think when we have a rough thing, we need to probably implement it, and then we can always come back and change and adjust it and continue to work on this as we go through it. So I just want to put that out there, because I know I came in front and said we want to develop this policy, but we might have to put it out in a quicker fashion than we want to. So that was one of those unintended things when you start reading the law and goes on. So I'll just highlight a few things that we came to realize that's a little bit different. But if you go to page 2 of it, 445.7, and we extracted subset A directly out of the statute wording that we had at the time. Again, this might change as we get the final way it's written in rules in law. But it says that when an officer starts developing probable cause or reasonable suspicion, they must activate the camera. Now, we do articulate other things like vehicle stops, and you're doing some type of other counters that they should be put on, but this is something that state statute directly stipulates you must have in your policy, and you must do that. So that's, just want to point that out to you. And then going on page 3, and it's about halfway down, this paragraph starts saying, once recording is initiated, and going in, it says, for the purpose of this policy, and an incident is considered complete, a reasonable person would consider the incident to have reached a logical ending. So that's some of the terminology we also took out of there, when to deactivate your body worn video. And it also parallels some of our in-car video processes. And then going on to page 4, under training and public releases, the second paragraph there, just stipulates, and we have in there House Bill 2571, because we don't even have the statute number. The last time I looked, it hasn't been codified. But it gives you, this is in regards to public records. And I know we had a discussion of disclosure of public records, so in here it addresses, the statute address that for us. Must be event which there is public interest. The request must be for approximate time or event. The request must be tailored to the relevant video of the event. This is particularly useful because I know we had discussion in here about what happened up in Washington, the state of Washington, and how somebody just, bombarded Seattle. So our lawmakers had that into consideration. And then the other thing is all faces must be rendered unidentifiable and blurred prior to release and conferring with the chief of police. So again, this was extracted directly out of there. And I think the intent of the rulemakers and lawmakers and the blurring thing will also reduce the number of requests that we have for video. And reading what they had, so I think that was the intent in there. And then the last thing that we embedded is on page 5 was the audio and video data management. And what we did is we then took the days retained and we put that chart in there. Now this is something that Lieutenant Klinko and I were working on with our implementation of the one of our pieces of body-worn video, the taser, because we were worried about, I think Joe, you brought up about the data management, the size of files and everything else. So we were concerned with that, and then we worked with legal, and we actually developed this before the statute comes out, before it came out. And the important thing is here is that we're compliant with the statute's intent, and we're actually 10 days over, just because in talking with the auditor, the attorney, we just wanted to have a buffer there just in case there was some lag time. And the statute particularly is 180 days a minimum, and we went 10 days over that. So everybody felt comfortable with that, and we didn't feel that it pushed the cost up. There's some things that will be retained forever, and I think as we work through the technology, we'll have to figure out how do we retain those items, forever. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts without getting regurgitating the exact policy. But those are some specific changes that we made that was reflective of statute. So, question.
Okay, questions? I have Steve first and then Claire.
Thanks. No, you picked right on the spot. What I saw was maybe an inconsistency in that 4457A, where the camera must remain on until the contact is completed. When I compare that to the following page, page 3, it's the third paragraph from the bottom. It says, if you discontinue recording before the incident is complete, verbally record your reason. So if you have a must, then you don't get to have a may, right? And if you must record until it's concluded, then there's no reason that it should be terminated prior to conclusion. If you want to allow termination prior to conclusion, then I think you got to create some flexibility in that 4457. Overall, I thought it was a really good job.
You need to respond.
Yeah, and I think this is not intended to wipe out A, but I think it's, and maybe we need a word on it, but it was for the other things, for the other types of stops, because this is similar to what we have in our in-car video, that they can terminate. For instance, you have a sensitive interview with somebody that's a victim of sexual assault or something like that. We don't want a body-worn video of that. Or you have somebody that's turning into a confidential informant. We want to give that officer that discretion. So I think the 10 is here, and we need to go back and make sure. Yeah. So I think it's not intended to countermand A, but I think it's to allow exceptions under other policies. So I'll take another look at that.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, but I respectfully disagree, because right above that sentence of if you discontinue are the 4 reasons that you can have for discontinuing. So presumably it's saying if you discontinue for one of these allowed reasons, you need to provide an explanation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, but I'd have to reread it again.
Okay. So I mean, I think you could add, if you discontinue recording due to one of the allowed reasons listed above, before the incident is complete, verbally record why, what that reason was. I just happened to get my ACLU of Oregon newsletter today and read their little update on this item because they, at the legislature, were part of crafting this law and supportive of body worn cameras, but also sensitive to the issue of when not wanting officers to have discretion about when they use it, that if you're gonna have them, you need to use them, and you can't be picking and choosing what you're gonna record. And so the law is pretty strict, but they also acknowledge that this is gonna be a process, that, you know, the legislature may come back and visit the statute again, and that refining this kind of policy is gonna take some time. So I appreciate how you started off with your presentation on that. So those were my main things, and then I just noticed a typo of an errant parenthetical on that section you called out on page 446.5.2 in the middle of the second paragraph where it says blurred, and then prior to release there's a
That was me, not Matt.
That's it.
Thank you, Claire. We have Jim, myself, Marshall, and Joe.
I guess I'm gonna go back to 445.7 also. Or actually right above it, where you have in 445.6, you talk about turning it off when somebody's in the car and you have the in-car video going, that's one of the exceptions. But yet in 445.7, E, it's a situation where you say that you won't turn it off when you're in a patrol vehicle. So there's kind of a disconnect there, so maybe that, whether the must be used gets modified so it's not a must, because then you're kind of stuck with it, or the redundancy above in the gets removed to be able to turn it off, so you can't turn it off while it's in the car. Does it pick up sound also?
The body worn video,
Yeah.
yes, it does.
Does the in-car video pick up sound also?
Yes.
Okay, so they're both.
And yeah, that's one of the concerns that we have in looking at the technology.
And I can see where that might be a place where you might want to turn it off, but again, you gotta make that clear that, I think you could have that in there to say you have to leave it on in one place and another place say you can't turn it off, so.
Anything?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, you got that, Chief?
I got it.
All right, so my concern was, I seem to recall in the in-car video discussion, there was a point where officers might have to retreat for strategy about how they were gonna handle a situation. They might not want the ICB on during that discussion. So is it necessary to put that in this policy as well, or do you believe that that in-car video policy would cover any recording? Because that does talk about recordings, I don't know, but strategy and discussions of sensitive information by the police before or while during filming with body worn video.
I would have to go back over that
Mhm.
and see what that intent is, but it's something that I could take a look at and see if it's, that intent's missing here, so.
Yeah, I think you should, keep that consistent with the ICV if you're gonna keep both, but that's all I had. So Marshall and then Joe.
This is just a wording thing, that 445.3, officers must provide narration or dictation of their actions to the camera, detailed police reports to require even when the camera wouldn't do that. I think that's the part you're getting at, you can't get out of it. On the other hand, it's entirely appropriate for an officer to explain their reasoning on camera as they're doing something as a way of remembering. So I don't know, maybe adjust the first sentence to say, although officers may document their rationale for something, or may use it as a memory aid.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefits that we talked about with this that is like consent searches. That's something we do, one thing to put on video, because it's so, yeah, I think maybe we can work on the wording on that.
Anytime you go through a closed door to a private space, you should think, okay, and if you want to do that, check this verbally, document, all right. That's recorded.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the intent is we didn't want officers dictating their police report on and seeing their body movement. Although there has been discussion panels where they talk about it could be the future where you don't even have a police report, it's the video or audio or something like that. But that's hopefully well after I retire.
Okay, Marshall, finished?
I'm not.
Done? Okay, Bill?
Okay. Yeah, I think you've got a sort of chain of custody issue with discontinuous time. In other words, if you're turning this thing on and off, and sort of versus editing. In other words, people are going to say, well, or let's say that, worst case, some officer decides he doesn't want that particular video to be shown, so he takes the camera home, puts it on a computer, erases that file. How do we detect those kinds of things, and how do we correct them?
Looking at, once the grant got awarded and looking at that, this is a possibility I've taken through and received some contracts for wording on what we want to look at. And some of that is, all that is really addressed in the specification of the hardware and the software. So it says it can't, and I don't have the wording in front of me, but it addressed those particular things you had, that it can't be edited through another system, it can't be, the file can't be removed and things like that. So that's going to be some of the requirements in the purchase of the equipment.
There's issues, for example, of having to rename files. I mean, if you have, say, each officer does 10 clips a day for a year, you have to rename. If you don't have something that does automatic naming that's unique to the clip and the camera, you'd have to rename 130,000 files. Seems like a poor use of time. So I think that that's an issue. You've got an issue on the thing about correct time and date stamp. I'm not even sure that you want to add that. I mean, if what you have is sequential events coming off of the camera, then the time and date stamp is off, then you're going to lose in court on things like that. And a time and dates, if a camera, cameras lose time, gain time. So how frequently are you going to calibrate the cameras, and what's the cost of doing that? You also have issues, for example, with officers watching their own videos. I mean, are we going to add that as overtime? Are we going to hire more officers to compensate for watching the videos in order to write their reports? There's a whole series of issues that we really haven't made it into this thing that I think are quite key to this overall enterprise.
The correct time, date stamp, I mean, that's something for the officers to ensure when they do. Most of these items are docked in there and it's synced up with the system so that the correct time, date stamp is there. But we have seen instances where our ICD systems, the time is off and we've got to listen to radio traffic and we've got to sync our different car systems up. So, so this is just a guiding thing that's saying, hey, before you pull this thing out,
I'm not even sure that time date stamp gives you a benefit in the sense that if you have, the officer has 10 files in a day, number 7 is the one of interest, and it corresponds to the people involved in it, then that's, you don't need that time and date stamp. And what it does is if you're insisting on it being present, then you simply create yourself a monster.
With the, and what the officers are doing is they're adding, and they're currently doing it now with the systems that we have, they add metadata to the incident, and that's what you saw in the section of time retention. Those are different codes that they utilize with their thing. So they'll go in, the technology that we currently have with one of our systems is their smartphone app, and they put the metadata in there and it transfers it. So it actually takes no time at all to hit that metadata in there. So they're constantly attaching the metadata right after the incident, so they're not doing it at a later time, they're doing it right after that situation happens. And then that, when that gets doctored there into the shift, all that data gets uploaded into the system.
I think there's other issues, but I'll yield the floor at this point. I've stirred the pot enough.
Edward?
I was thinking about this concern about missing data, officers concealing their actions by whatever, sabotaging the camera, what have you. Eugene is not Los Angeles. They rolled out badge cams a few years ago for thousands of officers, and they were transmitting to a little repeater antenna on the patrol car roof. And within the first month, most of those antennas were broken. I don't think those are our officers, but it strikes me that it's just as easy to track as somehow this officer's evidence keeps not showing up between the field and the station, is somehow this officer's recordings keep being not usable. That seems pretty easy for you to track, yes.
Well, it's another management thing we have to examine. And it's another expectation that we'll have to send to our sergeants and make sure, again, that's going to be part of the process of the larger deployment is to evaluate that.
At least in this instance, it seems like applying the same procedure you would to find somebody who's fooling around with evidence would pretty well translate to this. It's just looking at the electronic evidence, yes.
Yeah, and it'd be a violation of policy.
So,
Okay, well, we'll see you next month too then.
you guys all return for regrouping.
Yeah, and at this time in our agenda, it's time for a break, so 10 minutes. Come on back and we'll do the chief report. Oh, remembering the camera will be on for conversation purposes. Thank you. The mic is live. Oh, really?
Bob, be careful, this is my.
I know, this thing doesn't work. Well, it's trying that on its side.
Yeah, I'm gonna get rid, I think it's more of a hazard.
Can you get a hairdryer or
Do you
something?
mean pointed to your commission?
I've got tape upstairs, I just forgot to bring it today.
I think you're right, it's better to trip over this than that.
Well, especially when it's just the two of you,
Yeah.
I don't think you're gonna trip.
Yeah, nobody, we should take it. Thank you.
My answer was nothing. I said, what, you're not going to do a job? I said, you're not going to do one together. Yeah. People to work higher up in the organization. I said, no, I would actually much rather be wrong. He was just a itty bitty little mayor. I was the governor.
You haven't called me that shit yet.
We're still on LinkedIn. You know, the longer it ages, the more value it has.
So September 29th, 2002, we registered our article about
I just,
I was like, you go over there and say those for the
I just want to say,
I was like, I remember the article.
Getting appointed to the Human Rights Commission is such a big payola.
It's part of my graduating plan to become the great evidence.
I don't know if I have it right now. Sounds like last week.
That's why the unhoused people always sort of like the idea of having ideas collection.
Now be careful, this cord. She took that thing up, but just be careful. It's almost a trip on it, but that makes it pretty easy for me.
She's a near mark for
Good example for people that like PTSD.
Yeah, yeah.
There was an agreement at whatever the real cause was, those fires.
What are you talking about?
Our cameras, and sure enough. They stopped breaking.
Oh, no.
All I did was drive over here.
Yeah, but you've been in here all day.
Strategic planning meeting for the bank.
Oh, gosh, I didn't really.
What a day of all this time.
I know, well, we had cold case today, so I started at 2 or 8:30, yeah, so we take our coffee breaks, you know,
I know, you should just say
We don't know whether to give you money to maintain you.
Oh, yeah. Everyone spends money.
You're likely to have someone who might be less
Well, I know his wife was my daughter's preschool teacher. Oh, really? And we loved them, and we actually, every once in a while, when it was important, we stopped by and see them.
Okay, he's a great guy. Yeah, we were there, he put a lot of time into it. I knew, because he had a quick say, because it was a big deal right on the river. You're leaving us, aren't you? It's like, well, you're a guy with, numbers. We go through the cases, we start developing. Cops that went out there and keep paging and talking, show pictures, and I think it's well done. Most cases. So we just go through what we have to do, what can we do now? Well, wait a minute, what about DNA? So, one would think that.
Right, that's the point. It's better to make her announcement than want to make her someone
Look at this one. The impression you want to do.
Can I get back down?
Supreme with that. They're strong on what I'm working on. Those They would like to know what's the street in front of you. You need maybe 4 or 5 Oh yeah, like our big potholes there. Because that's what happened.
Where are you talking about?
Very low percentage.
There's no question.
Go to meetings, listen, you see the For the engineers, if these people in the neighborhood a mile away know that they see more traffic, that's what they're changing.
I don't know if you hear about this.
Chain their wheelchairs together in part of the intersection, post it to YouTube, or get in trouble. And it's sad to watch that happen. It is very much edge of the map thinking. It's like, no, our project area is the base. And we did what we needed to do inside that area.
It's like 5 cases. We found 3 of the winners. That's it.
That's possibly the smartest thing anybody knows.
This guy's a picture of back here.
Well, it's like this, don't give the credit to.
We've got this pattern of predators. That's what he did in California.
You have to get all these guys back at the end of the ship. Is that a compelling thing? Honestly, we all just stood around and talked. Not really hard. Some people get tired of this. Always think about people who are doing
We don't really want this problem. This is
really honestly doesn't want to be help. How do they collect? Yes, they should warn people that.
Well, that's what I always wondered. Fresh minds. Kind of right there, they just didn't quite put them together.
Yeah, this is what I told you about in Walmart. They had the reports in the file, all these reports were in there. They were picking them up.
Go home.
Can we get the commissioners back to the table, please, so we get the meeting going?
You wish.
Gone over a little bit. Thank you. Anyway, it is. Yeah, that's one. So you have to file. You have to try to somebody's.
Yes.
Back to work.
Exactly your work.
Very interesting.
The next item on the agenda is the chief's report, so I will turn the meeting over to the chief. Oh, sorry, Carter.
All right. Okay, well, I'll just go through, touch on a few things that I think might be important. On the chief's activities, there's the mental health criminal justice coordination meeting. There are a lot of little meetings going on around the county about what we can do to improve services to behavioral health, particularly those people on the street. And this is one we had with, it was me, the fire chief, the city manager, Central Services Director, Christy Hammett, who also has the municipal court in her department, and then the county administrator, sheriff, and some of his staff, and then Lane County Behavioral Health managers were there. And really, we're just brainstorming where we need to go from here, because we all know that there's a huge need there. And then I met with the residents at the Opportunity Village for an hour and a half or so, and we had a pretty good conversation. And the point of being there was to ask them, you know, a long time ago, my little family needed some pretty intense services from a hospital, from hospitals actually. And they came to us afterwards and asked, tell us how our services were received by your family and what could we have done differently. And so that's how I approached this meeting with them, and the same with a similar meeting over at with the Life Change group at the Eugene Mission, and that was to ask, how are you receiving our policing services? What's it like from your perspective? What'd you like to see differently? And then the next step in those two meetings is for me and Dan Bryant and Jack Tripp to sit down to see if it would be appropriate to have a chief's advisory committee of people who are or who have recently been homeless and homeless advocates to help inform the decisions that I make about how we work with that population. So that's what the point of that is. Let's see here. You know, that's, you've read the rest, so perhaps I should just answer questions that you might have.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Maybe I just missed this in all the other reports, but like on the 1 week and the 4 week information that you gave us, what are MV parts?
Motor vehicle parts.
That's what I assumed it was, but I noticed you don't have a little icon for them. What, is that just parts being sold, or
stolen? Usually they are catalytic converters. There's some material in there that at one time or another is really valuable.
Okay, so that's what that, has it been all the reports, so I just missed it all the time?
I think they started adding it about 6 months ago.
Okay. You also had on your looking forward section, tip a cop. What is that?
It's a side job that some of us do to make.
Okay, that's okay.
It's
a pool too, or what?
Yeah, it's a fundraiser for Special Olympics.
Okay.
So we'll go to a restaurant. We've been to Red Robin. We've also done it at a place off of Gateway.
Hot Valley or something.
Yeah, no. But anyway, another restaurant over there. And we fill people's water and bust their tables. And the tips that we receive for that go to Special Olympics, which is basically our primary charitable giving.
Questions? Claire?
I just very pleased to hear, Chief Kearns, what you just mentioned about the meeting you had with Opportunity Village and folks at the Mission, and really like your idea of trying to organize a regular meeting of some kind with folks who are or have experienced homelessness. I think that's very forward-thinking and could really yield some not only, you know, important insights for your officers, but also assist those folks in feeling empowered in terms of how they live in our community. So as you think about that, I think a very important piece, which I'm sure you recognize, is to maybe identify some trusted facilitators, because obviously there's going to be some skepticism and uncertainty to overcome with those folks feeling comfortable and confident and safe to really engage with you in an honest way. But I really appreciate you thinking about doing that. I think that could be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, thank you.
Nobody else on the list? Let me just mention something real quick. The LECC meeting at DPSST that you see in there, That's the Governor's Law Enforcement Contacts Commission. Is everybody familiar with the work that we're doing now? State statute requires that the LECC set up a reporting method for anyone who wants to complain about racial profiling. And so we've met a couple of times to develop the report that'll be used. So people can report online. We've developed a form for that, or they can receive a blank form and fill it in and send it to us. So that whole process is being completed now. And in fact, it needs to be done by the end of October.
Edward and then Jim, at the same time.
Chief, you and I spoke, a month or two back about some of the Facebook pages that I'm working on, and there was one in particular, Welcome to Eugene, that's aimed at newcomers and a lot of students. And you said that's a great idea. That's just now reached a point where it's reaching about 15,000 people a week. And it occurs to me in terms of the knock and talk that you and the other officials do, that for next year, maybe we could work together on that more and save you some shoe leather. There's still a benefit to the face-to-face, but there's folks who aren't home when you come by, and they probably have Facebook accounts.
Yeah.
It's very easy to get to them that way, so.
Good. Yes, the university organizes that, so I can introduce you to the neighborhood coordinator.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Jim.
I guess in the news, your suspect in Newark, Washington, you said there was some tenacious officer and detective follow-up. What can you kind of describe?
Yeah, I'm not going to have all the details naturally, but Kennewick, Washington had a number of places broken into, firearms were stolen and other valuable property, and young people in their 20s, meth addicted, and ended up down I-5 and ended up in the Eugene area. We somehow learned about it, and of course their criminal behavior is really typical around here, so we happen to be pretty good at finding those types of offenders. And I think we didn't capture them all in the same day or during the same episode, but ultimately got them all, not all the stolen property back, but much of it. And it was a case of our detectives and patrol officers working together. And I think because some of the property was pretty valuable and the firearms were unusual, that's why it made the news.
Have they been able to do much here?
I don't think they committed much in the way of crime here. Most of what we found is what they did up there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for the report, Chief. As always, we appreciate updates.
You bet.
On what's going on. And that takes us to our next item, which is the 21st century policing. And Chief Durr is going to help us and guide us through that.
So I'll just speak in general, then I'll highlight some of the points. It's a pretty easy read, and I think, and I'll really, Chief, if you want to step in at any time, because the Chief's read this quite a few times, and I think this is created because they're looking at what's going on in law enforcement in general, and I think you have some outliers where some things aren't. Agencies aren't doing things the way that's standardized, and I think the difficulty in professional law enforcement, Chief, I'll ask you, because how many different law enforcement agencies are throughout the United States?
18,000.
18,000 police agencies, and we all have different policies as we're working on policies here that are different, so we tailor-made these things. So there's different practices. A majority of those police agencies are under 15 or 20 law enforcement officers, and so their capacity to do things and have standardized approach, throughout the United States, it's not standardized, and whereas I'll steal in the Chief's lines, whereas in England and Scotland they have a centralized thing where they can standardize things. The United States, we don't have that. So I think this document that came out that's developed is an attempt to try to standardize law enforcement practices, identify best practices that agencies should strive to attain. And going through this, there's a lot of things that EPD is on the forefront, and there's areas that we can improve on. So, and I'll just highlight some of the areas and then get questions and field them as best I can. I'm not the constructor of this document, so I'm just kind of reciting my mindset. I think one of the biggest things is on the page 47, and it starts in 1.1, starts talking about a guardian mindset. And that's a shift. There's been a lot of this public, not public discussion, but police discussion, especially around our training, because officers are trained in what they discuss a warrior type of mentality, because we're involved in so many different situations, and we're trained to come out of these combative and difficult situations that we want to go home. And so it's that mindset of you can't afford to lose, and it's been labeled a warrior mindset. But I think this shift of a guardian is a difficult conversation that we're going to continue to have, and what's the correct term? But it's that shifting that we expect you to be the guardians of our Constitution, the safekeepers of those people who are unable to care for themselves, and all these different requirements that we have is what they call as a guardian. So that's something that's going to throughout law enforcement, it's require a huge shift and a cultural shift, and government is slow. So, but it's something that we're going to have to train and constantly reinforce. Skipping down to 1.4. Law enforcement agencies should promote legitimacy internally within the organizations and applying principles of procedural justice. I know the chief is working, myself, I've been absent on a couple things, but working on different formats of procedural justice. And that's going to have to be a citywide approach and a community approach moving forward. So that's not an easy task, but I think that's a goal for us to attain to stretch out for. And then under that, it says 1.142, law enforcement agencies' leadership should examine opportunities to incorporate procedural justice into the internal discipline process, placing additional importance on the values. Union leadership should be partners in the process. And being witness to what goes on in the agency, I know that the chief is constantly with the union, and we're developing a partnership with the union moving forward, so that we can implement these changes. And I think that partnership is key, and I think it's a little understated here. And that's something that the agency's working on moving forward. Moving under that same point, I'm sorry, I didn't define the pillar, but it's we're talking about building trust and legitimacy within the community. And my takeaway from building trust and legitimacy is in a short term, if you want me to define legitimacy, is it's something we're talking about in the police department. It's something we got to train our officers on and talk to them as supervisors and hold them accountable and hold ourselves accountable. That is to explain ourselves. And I think one of the situations of legitimacy that I could try to graphically lay out is an officer is out on a bomb call. And he's established a perimeter and he's standing there, and somebody runs up to the officer and says, "Hey, what's going on here?" And traditional policing is, "Step back, ma'am. This is a police zone, and that's all I can tell you." What legitimacy tells us is to now take that person that comes up that has a concern, that community member, and say, "Sir, madam, sorry, this is we have a situation here. We have an explosive device. For your own safety, please stay away. And if you see anybody else, can you please ask them to stay away from here, so that for their own safety and stuff." So it's a little bit of a shift of movement. So that's just a simplified form of what legitimacy is. And it's explain ourselves, explain our actions as law enforcement, so that the community understands, and it also builds trust at the same time. So, and then 153 talks about should create opportunities in schools and communities for positive enforcement actions. And there's other school things that are later on, but my takeaway is we're fortunate here that we have school resource officers in there. We talked about school resource officers and Captain Camcar make a decision to deploy other officers and assets last week when that incident happened, to reassure the public. So we have that relationship where school resource sergeant, Carl Stubbs, was able to reach out to the schools and say, hey, we're going to provide additional people here staffing in the schools because of that relationship. They were very like, yes, please do that. So we're already there with that. 1.7 talks about you should track the level of trust in the police by the community, and they measure as they measure changes in crime. Excuse me. This is something that I think, on my level, I think the police commission can help us out. Is how do we measure trust within the community? And I don't have an answer for you. These are lofty goals. So that's something that we need to work on, is how do we measure trust? What is trust? How do we measure it within the community? 1.8 talks about that we should create a workforce that contains a broad range of diversity. We are currently practicing that. We have a recruitment team led by Division Manager Tim Shuck, and we have 2 sections of that, one for the Communication Center and then one for law enforcement. And this recruiting team, I think Lieutenant McGann is in charge of it under Tim, and they're looking to make sure that the law enforcement reflects the community and that we have high standards of bringing people in so that these things that we say are important, these people have those qualities and characteristics. So that's a huge thing, is not only shifting your agency, but as you bring more people into your organization to make sure that they meet those standards we set forward. Pillar 2 talks about policy and oversight. There's a lot of agencies that don't have the oversight that the Eugene Police Department. I know when I came from my prior organization, it was a little different walking in here to having a police commission, to having a citizen review board, and to having an auditor system. And I think we take that for granted. Where this is a strange thing for other organizations throughout the country. So we're fortunate that we have a lot of this. And can we get better? Absolutely. But I think we're way ahead of the ball game by this. And there's different sections I pointed out that we're hitting on in section 2.2. They talk about law enforcement agencies have training and use of force and de-escalation. That's something that we're talking about is how can we de-escalate that situation? How can our words, how can our behaviors, how can that rescue vehicle not be put here but be over here so it de-escalates it? And it's an art, it's not a science. But again, we talk about de-escalation, but there's just not a standard procedure to go adopt. And so these are things that law enforcement throughout the country is saying, okay, what does de-escalation mean? Where's the training program on that? And so how do we train our way out of this and de-escalate the situation so it doesn't come into a use of force situation or something even more than that. Again, 2.26 talks about how there should be a serious incident review board, law enforcement staff and community members to review officer-involved shootings, use of force. I think we just saw that with the bad case where we had a use of force board comprised of somebody from the mental health, the auditor's office. So I think we're there on that. And again, going into 2.7, I think the police commission, I'll give kudos here, is it talks about how we should create policies for mass demonstrations. So you all are engaged in that right now, and again, I have some notes about how the auditors in 2.8 is, and this CRB is doing that. One of the other things, and I don't know where I marked it, that's in here, is, and they talk about stops data. That's a pilot project that Captain Cam Carden under 2.6 is doing, and that's getting ready to jumpstart here as they're getting some of the equipment and some things. Chief, did you have anything on the stop?
Yeah, our stops data pilot project is going to start in about 2 weeks, but it won't be with the SunGuard system because the SunGuard vendor just has been incapable of making that work. So our Public Works has a IT technician who has developed an app for an iPhone that we're going to roll out in a couple of weeks. We have 12 volunteer police officers who are gonna use it, and we'll run it for about 6 months, review the process, make adjustments, run it for another 6 months, and then experiment with what the analysis could look like before we roll it out department-wide.
So and then, again, another example of what we have in place out of this is, and under section 2.13 is they should have policies and enforce them of prohibiting profiling and discrimination based on race, sex, and all those other different classifications within there. And on page 52, we move into the pillar of technology. We touched on some of that with the body-worn camera. In here, they talk about body-worn systems. They talk about government assistance with law enforcement. And I thought, which was insightful, again, I'll give kudos to the police commission under 3.2, under 3.2.1. It talks about working in collaboration and community advisory boards and develop policy for new technology. And I think that was Commissioner Tyndall. I think he got that 6 or 7 months where we now have that policy put in place about best practice and how to deal with emerging technology. So again, that's another example of us being ahead of the game, not behind it. Then moving into pillar 4, so that's kind of like an overview of that section. In the social media, it really doesn't touch on social media, and Melinda McLaughlin, our PIO, she's really attuned to that, and she's in the process of developing a social media policy and practice. And that's an emerging trend and a difficult creature for law enforcement to handle because there's so many different complexities with that. So again, as a group, we're moving through it, but I think with our PIO, we're ahead of the game. And then pillar 4 moves into community policing and crime reduction. And there's a shift in law enforcement where we had community policing and problem solving, and we moved into an era of CompStat, accountability, measuring data, and I think we got away from the community policing a little bit as law enforcement in total. But I think this is addressing that balance between both. It's measuring, it's saying that community policing is a key function to help build trust, legitimacy, but we also need to measure what we do. So you can't be reliant on one without the other. So I think this is an attempt for law enforcement to come back together and say both of these are priority, not one over the other. So those are concepts of the community policing and the guardian is part of that community policing officer type of concept. And I think 4.4 sums it all up when it says communities should support a culture of practice and police that reflects the values of protection and promotion of the dignity of all, especially the most vulnerable. So that's kind of like your guardian philosophy right there. And pillar 5 is training and education. It addresses a lot of this is the federal government and testing process, but it also hits on the importance of training our officers and training our leadership. Because if we don't have the leadership to guide our officers through situations, engage them, reinforce the values that we have as an agency, then all the policies that we have in place, the practice will override that. So it's key that we have leadership training and training for our officers. And again, coming here from another agency, we have a lot more training than what other organizations have, and I think that's something we need to continue to capitalize as we transition and move the agency into the direction and the vision of the organization. And the pillar 6 is a discussion about officer wellness and safety. Obviously, we want officers to go home, and so it talks about that safety aspect of it, but also the philosophy is having that officer being, it's not here, but it's through conversations, but it's wellness is not only physical wellness, which we want all of our officers to be, but it's also mental wellness. So having wellness programs, what do they look like? How do we deploy those out? How do we provide wellness incentives? And there's a lot of different things that we have to work through as an agency that we don't have answers. I mean, that's not as, you see as brief as it is, 6 just a half a page of discussion. They don't have more concepts there, so it's more generality there. So it's kind of a higher level presentation on the different pillars where I thought we were hitting some on, and we're definitely not hitting everywhere, but I think it's a roadmap for agencies in general on what the expectations for agencies should be working for in the future.
Okay, I have one person so far, Claire. You haven't forgotten the question.
No, I wrote it down.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, thank you for taking us through that. It's definitely an interesting document, and I think you're right that in many ways this community has really embraced a lot of these concepts, and in fact even piloted some of them. I mean, I think we're one of the smallest cities to adopt a civilian review board process in the United States. So I had a couple of kind of internal questions, and then one about section 4. When you were talking at the first section about partnership with the union, I'm curious if there is a former labor management committee structure that you already utilize as a department.
We do not have a formal labor management joint committee like some organizations do. Instead, I meet one-on-one with the union president every week, and we work through things that way. And, you know, my time as chief, sometimes the union president has crossed their arms and said, all communication is off. You want to talk to me, go through our attorney, and other times it's been very collaborative. We happen to be in one of those periods right now. So it's an interesting labor environment, and it's very different than AFSCME, for instance, or other larger unions. Standalone, independent policing unions are just different than the statewide or national organizations.
So, for the union I work for at local hospitals, each hospital then has a labor management committee made up of the HR staff within that hospital and their local union leadership. So it's just a model that might serve that piece of the 21st century model that, you know, the union may not be interested in doing it, but
Yeah.
it's a concept that's out there and works for other unions. And then kind of along the same lines, I was also curious, and I know with our civilian review board and auditor system, this might be more challenging, but it mentioned in there encouraging departments to have a non-punitive peer review process for critical incidents. Is that a practice that this department has in some fashion?
No, the closest thing we have to it is my authority to panel a use of force review board. We had an incident some months ago where a lot of force had to be used, and even though there was no evidence on its face, it looked as though the officers did everything that they should have. I decided, because it was such a dynamic and serious incident, that it was worth looking at closely, and so I paneled a review board, which is made up of supervisors. Took a look at it, mostly for the purpose of learning what lessons can be taken from it in terms of training and policy, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with.
And then my last question has to do with the section 4.6, which is talking about collaboration with the addressing the needs of children and youth, and then reducing aggressive law enforcement tactics that stigmatize youth, marginalize their participation in schools and communities. I know that, again, when I was working for the ACLU of Oregon, that the issue of the school-to-prison pipeline and the placement of school resource officers in schools was a real concern, that kids were being channeled into criminal citations for things that in the good old days might have just been, you know, in-school discipline and have nothing to do with the criminal justice system. So I don't know that that was particularly a problem in Eugene in terms of the data that we looked at, but I just want to draw attention to that section, that having school resource officers, I think, is a good public safety piece, but there's that concern then that suddenly anything a kid does on campus might be viewed in a criminal context and a law enforcement context instead of just a disciplinary context for the school. And so I just want to draw your attention there and just put that thought in their mind about it.
Yeah, instead, were you gonna say something?
I would just say, you know, the school resource officer, I think their approach, and I should say our approach of our school resource officers is probably an example of community-based policing. They really are community police officers, and they're not in there arresting, that's not their first thing. They're in there to problem solve, and work through it, not to criminalize people. And I think that's their mindset in there, so.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I have Jim and then Edward.
Well, you mentioned about measuring the level of trust the community has. Well, the chief will remember a survey that we did put out that did measure the level of trust, and it was a statistically valid one, if I remember right. Is that right, Carter? That did have that information that could very easily be, and I think we talked about reinitiating that survey periodically to be able to determine, is it going up, down, where are we standing? That was kind of the initial baseline. But I think the chief actually came through with money to, at that point now, money may be tight again, which it probably is, but he managed to squeeze some funds out to be able to get that out. That could be reused with maybe very little or no revamping. And since you've got a baseline now, you can measure since that period of time, what does it look like now?
And again, their intent there was it's a constant measure, kind of like what we do with DLP, not as frequent as DLP, but it's something to evaluate how we're doing. It's another tool and mechanism for us to take a look at, is where they were getting with it, so.
But that might be something that's reusable. I mean, it's already there.
I'm not as familiar with that. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, most of the people, I mean, I think Carter was there. I'm not even sure Bob was around when that went out. So I might
Survey?
be on it. Yeah.
Yeah, we discussed
So
it.
it might be only the three of us and the chief at this table that were here during that time.
Very, okay, Edward.
I think Jim covered my point.
Oh, okay. You guys both raised your hands at the same time, the last two discussions. And now you both have the same point, so I'm beginning to wonder what's going on.
Kicking each other into the table.
Yeah.
That's right. So, anybody else with questions, comments, something else you'd like to see discussed about this? We wanted to bring it to the commission because it was so comprehensive, it covers everything that we cover when we talk about it. And so I might ask you to read it again between now and the next meeting, and perhaps we can use it in future sessions to guide us in our discussions as well, because it's so well thought out and so important to, in light of the things that have happened recently, and keeping in mind we've lost people unnecessarily, as well as those that are involved in criminal activity. There have been unnecessary deaths. And we've lost our 99th police officer this year in this country, and that's a lot to lose. In fact, the last one was a Cherokee Indian police officer in Asheville, North Carolina, I think. So it's happening all across the country, and people are unnecessarily involved in bad situations. So this document itself was made up with people who are concerned about getting it together. I think with that thought process of keeping everything together, we should maybe use this as a guideline. So, Joe, you had something?
Yeah, I'm sort of wondering if you've got any sense of how this whole report is being received by various different groups in the community. I mean, there is sort of this right-wing thing for on right-wing radio that hates Obama and probably is having a field day with this particular report. And I'm wondering if you're sensing any, negativity toward it. I mean, reading through it, it seemed all very reasonable to me, but, not everybody holds the same opinions I do. So, other people like maybe, within the union who might have a more, a different bent on this. Have you got any feedback yet on their attitudes toward this?
The only people really paying close attention to it are police chiefs and high-ranking police administrators, and it's being embraced, thoroughly by the business that I'm in. I don't know anybody who's rejecting it. I haven't heard much reaction from. We rolled this out to all of our managers at our command leadership team meeting last week, and I didn't hear much of a response to that, maybe you did. The re-engineering use of force, worries police officers, because they think, are you gonna train me to put me in greater danger? Is that what this is gonna do? So that's their fear, and I would expect that. So we need to not only have an expectation around use of force where we look for ways to resolve things peacefully, but that we do it in ways that make our officers safer. And the training needs to be really clear so that they're not hesitating to defend themselves when they shouldn't. But those are the kinds of things I've heard discussed around it.
Thanks. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I think that pretty much concludes our agenda for tonight. We have time for, I think, some commissioner comments. Yes, I've left closing comments in there, so if anybody has something they'd like to bring up on their own tonight, please feel free. Okay.
I would, if you're about to adjourn, there's one last thing.
We are. Looks like.
I published a memo to the city manager today about officers' use of deadly force in the incident on DeVos on March 30th, and I'd be interested in hearing your reaction. Not tonight, I don't want to take over the meeting, but if you get a chance to read that and you have some insights or advice or observations, I'd love to hear it from any of you.
I think everybody received that email today from the chief. I was going to respond, didn't have time today.
Okay.
I suggest others as well just respond back on email. You can do that. All right. Thank everyone who came out tonight to participate in the discussion and hear what we had to say. It's important to us to not sit in an empty room like we feel like we're not having anybody here. And thank you all for coming again. We appreciate it. See you next month. Thank you.
Hey, Bob. I have a board meeting and a planning session this 12th and 13th.
Okay. Oh, gee, that's too bad.
Except for it's working, it's, yeah.
So we'll miss you, Steve. Thank you for letting me know.
Okay,
Thank you.
good.
Encourage you on this next month.
Okay, so will I.
But that's right, you won't be here either. How am I gonna remember? Steve?
You're not gonna be here, or?
Plan is that Jeremy will be covering.
Okay.
Thanks to private from, yep.
You'll be here for that, right?
I'm here for you people. Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, what?
I am here. I'm here for you always. Are you free earlier?
Yeah, I can come in
Are you free earlier?
You'll have a job. I know.
It'd be stellar if you could. I can change.
Yeah, we're struggling to try to figure out how to do it. It's open. My funds to do that. Moving in, you charge us to be able to put that out, so.
Of course, you might be able to get something that would use that something. I'm like, what do you want? Somewhere, I think so. 25, there's so many things.
But then what
Is there any time during the day you're free to?
Here's what I got here, okay? If you're all here, the lawyers.
Police commission.
We'll do that, we'll do that.
I can make it anytime, I could make it anytime after 1:30. 1:30 works? 1:30 works great.
Very much the police officers. Well, we forget sometimes that portal to the community is part of our job.
Yeah, that's why the camera discussion right now.
Yes, October 16th.
That is.
I would have been, I mean, I could have made it.
Right, and right now.
I appreciate you.
No worries. And Chief, I don't know why your panel has 4 stars. I'm still not clear on this now. That's a smaller department. I just sheriff gets 4 stars.
the different associations have their
Oh, so
own
the Sheriff
signature.
Association.
They like that many stars.
Our sheriff does that too.
We got it. Second biggest city in Bill. Salem's over.
Believe me, I'd rather only have one.
It's really phone call.
Or let's.
His name is Carter. Yeah. Turning 60.